Hey there, welcome back to 16 Stops, a podcast. My name is Josh, and I'm here with Brandon.
What's up?
And today in episode 23, we're going to talk about what's the deal with the Canon C80.
I was just thinking of the Seinfeld
I know, I was thinking...
theme song.
Can you do the, what's the deal with the Canon C80?
I can't, man. I'm not going to even
come
attempt
on.
it.
All right. I can't even attempt it either. Anyways, before we get into it, though, huge thanks to our sponsor, B&H Photo, who's been kind enough to sponsor Brandon and I for making this ridiculous show. We love B&H.
Isn't it crazy?
I know, it's awesome. So thankful. B&H has been so supportive of what Brandon and I create, and also on my personal channel as well. We're both big fans of being customers of theirs. They have the Paybu card, which saves you tax. There'll be links in the description for all the gear that we use to record the podcast, and we'd really love it if you go check out those links and show some support.
Thanks, B&H. You're the best.
They really are. They really are. Anyways, so we have been blasted with camera releases lately, Brandon.
Oh my gosh.
And like so... And we're mainly just talking about Canon here, and that's definitely what we want to talk about today. I feel like they just came out with a whole bunch of like serious cameras, like expensive, like high quality, high level cameras.
They just threw 4 different cameras at us. We got the R5 Mark II, the R1, the C400, and the C80.
All right, so we're going to dive into mainly the C80, but how it fits in with all the rest of the cameras. I've been covering some of the R5 II stuff on my own channel because I did buy an R5 II. And I guess towards the end, we'll talk about if we're going to pre-order the C80 or any of the other cameras.
Ooh.
We'll save that to the end. All right. And I don't even know if Brandon is or not, so that'll be interesting.
I'm a loose cannon. Who knows?
All right. So,
No pun intended.
I don't want to get too much into the technical specs and stuff, because if you're watching this, you probably already know most of the differences between a lot of these cameras. But Brandon, how does the C80 fit into the lineup of their cameras at the moment? Because it's getting really complicated. There's, we have the R5C, we have the C70, we have the C400, the C300 Mark III. All these so many different cameras now.
How does it fit in? Well, this is how my brain thinks of it. C400, C80, R5 Mark II. R1 is like very photography centric, but I think there's enough video specs in an R5 Mark II and R5C that the C80 is over that, but it's obviously not a C400 because it costs how much does a C400 cost? $8,000?
Yeah.
A little over half, right? It's like 65% of what the C400 is. So that's where I see it fitting in price-wise and capability-wise, but it also kind of feels like Canon might have just shot themselves in the foot creating this thing, but who knows?
So this is that's really interesting, because I can't think of it as like a linear thing anymore, because you're like, well, this one's kind of better at this, but this one's kind of better.
I get it, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of all over the place. And I think the C80, C400 combo is very similar to the C70, C300 Mark III combo. But I think Canon did a much better job of keeping the prices a lot closer, because when they came out with the C300 Mark III, it was $11,000. And when they came out with the C70, which is the same sensor and almost all of the capabilities of the C300, it was half the price at $5,500. So I do think that the $5,500 price of the C80 and the $8,000 price of the C400 make a little bit more sense. Do you agree?
I totally agree. And for those C400, pre-orders, there's probably not the biggest knife in their chest being turned when the C80 came out. They're like, it's only, a few $1,000s cheaper. It's not like half the price of what I just pre-ordered.
I did see a lot of comments in Facebook groups where people are like, I immediately canceled my C400 order and bought 2 C80s.
That's what I mean. Like, did Canon shoot themselves in the foot? Because correct me if I'm wrong, the C300 had been out for a little while in people's hands before they gave the C7. Like, I didn't anticipate Canon like pulling that kind of move with the C400 not even being delivered. I thought for sure C400 would come out and it would be out for a while, and then they'd be like, oh, by the way.
So there's so many other factors at play here. I feel like maybe the C400, because it hasn't shipped yet at the time of recording this, maybe because it hasn't shipped yet, they're like, well, let's get some C80s out there, and people could like cancel their orders and maybe relieve some of the production stress that they had on the C400. Who knows, right?
Yeah, who knows? It's Canon and the monkeys with a wheel.
But it's interesting to see how they have their, well, a lot of people call them cripples, but we'll call them product line delineation or product segmentation or...
That sounds much more professional than Canon cripples.
Yeah, so let's first talk about, I want to first talk about C80 versus C70 for a little bit, because I think a lot of people love the C70, both of us included. We love that camera.
Yep,
and
it's an awesome
we're
camera.
like looking for a Mark II of that or an improvement of that. Basically, they did sort of do that and sort of didn't at the same time. So I know a lot of us were like, we just want a full frame C70, and they kind of gave it to us, but they took out the DGO, the dual gain output sensor. It's like basically the same camera. It's a little bit taller from what I saw. They added SDI and Ethernet. They actually, you know what was really cool is they fixed the holes on the bottom of the camera. So they actually, like,
that was a big thing.
It shouldn't have been a thing anyways, but you know, it was a thing.
True.
They supposedly have a better hinge on the LCD screen, so but still SD cards. So I think it was interesting to see that the price was the same. So the C70 at launch was $5,500. So was the C80. Were you surprised to see the price the same, or did you expect it to be a little bit more expensive?
Honestly, I wasn't really expecting the C80 at all anytime soon. And given Canon's history, I thought for sure they were going to cripple it way more than they did. I did not expect it to be the same price. I would figure with the inflation, it would be at least $500 higher. I didn't expect it to have internal ND. I was like, there's no way they're going to put internal ND in this camera, even though it's a C70, essentially. They're not going to put internal ND because then that like starts chopping down the C400, you know, pre-orders. There were lots of things that Canon did that I did not expect because it was so un-Canon-like. Now, Canon still has thrown some like boomerangs and hit us with some cripples, but not to the extent we normally would. You know, like, oh, I'm using this old battery and now I can only get HD at 24 frames a second. That's something Canon would normally do.
Okay, so I feel like they're kind of taking part of the Sony playbook here. They're doing a little bit of recycling because we see, and I think that's probably what brought the cost down or keep it the same as it was before. They're basically using the same body. They did change it a little bit, but a lot of the parts and stuff, like the ports, the cards, they was the same. And then they took the sensor out of the C400. So I don't think they had to spend a lot of R&D to get the C80 up and running. So that might be where some of the savings are. What, in your opinion, are some of those little cripples that we're seeing in the C80?
To me personally, I don't even have the camera.
Neither of us do.
And I don't perceive some of the cripples like other people would. I know a lot of people are hung up on the frame rates because it doesn't give you the same frame rates that the C400 does. I don't care. Listen, 4K 120 is awesome. I don't need 6K 60. 4K 20 or 6K 24, that's 95% of what I shoot. So I already know like this camera would be phenomenal. But the big cripple for me, and other people would like, it makes sense because it's the C70, is probably the dual SD cards.
Yes.
Like, if you can add an extra thread on the bottom, if you can add time code, if you can reinforce the hinge and give it a new lip and add, you know, LAN support and do a few of these other things, is it really that hard to remove an SD card and put a CF Express Type B in there? So for me, that's probably the major cripple. Out of all of the cripples, that's probably it for me. Other than that, this camera seems pretty GD phenomenal.
Yeah, it does look pretty awesome. And I agree with everything you said. They also had the SDI port, which was like, people are like, people being critical. People are being critical, like, it looks dumb up there. It's like, hey, they got it on there. It's actually near where the monitor is going to go. It kind of makes sense. I love
that. Shorter cable, that's awesome.
Yeah. I think like what I was saying before about the recycling, and that they probably just grabbed the right-hand side of that camera and just left it alone, because I think it looks identical on the right-hand side, is that they didn't want to like have to redesign that. But still, like, SD card should not be in a camera like that for your main slot, especially because, as most of you guys out there watching, and I know Brandon and I know, like using CF Express B at this point should be the standard. They're so much faster. They're more reliable. When I'm emptying cards, like CF Express B cards are almost like instant in my head. Like SD cards take a while.
The people that are like, you know what, SD is better because it's still in my computer. There's this thing called an adapter, like right here, and that just goes into your computer too.
And they're cheaper. The cards are cheaper.
This is what you do to the SD card. This is what you do to the CF Express. Magic.
I know. And the CF Express B cards are so much cheaper for a lot more space.
Bigger. Like a 1 terabyte for my KX cost me $179. 1 terabyte. Massive.
Yeah,
and they offload
awesome.
so much faster. But I'm assuming, Josh, would you agree that this is the reason why it can't shoot 6K 60? Or
Absolutely.
do you think...
No.
It's just media write speeds, right?
I think so. I think it was
in
some ways, like, you know, for the people that are out there looking for controversy or, you know, whatever conspiracy. It's like, yeah, they left those in there so they would cripple it, so you couldn't get 6K 60. So if you want 6K 60 raw, you have to get the C400. This is the conversation everyone has about Canon. You just got to accept it if you're in the Canon world. There's going to be delineation between the different models.
Yeah, but every company does that
for sure.
Like. I'm not gonna lie. This is probably the least cripply Canon has been in a long time. Like, this is a weird time in history where Canon isn't throwing you just like random hairball, like, you know, asterisks. They're more or less throwing Hail Marys, and they're really tiny things that they're like, guys, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to buy the more expensive camera if you want like all of the coolest features. We're sorry.
So
this is weird being an advocate of Canon right now. I feel weird. I feel dirty.
Well, they're not paying you anything, so don't worry about it.
No, they're not.
The C70 also was really interesting. They did get a lot of firmware updates, and that camera became a very different camera over time. Like, no one expected them to put RAW in that camera, and they did. So it'd be interesting to see how these cameras evolve over time. But like you said, there are some things that you need to pay for if you want with the C400, which is like the step up from that. They have the same sensor. They have backside illuminated, stacked full-frame sensors with a triple base ISO, which that sounds amazing because we both love the high ISO capabilities of like the Sony cameras at 12,100. But I know for me personally, Brandon, maybe you too, is I use that middle ISO a lot. Like the R5C, for example, having the second base at 3,200 is so useful to me, more useful than the 12,800. So
for sure.
That's really cool.
I used the crap out of my S5 Mark II's 4,000 today. Used the crap out of it. Yeah,
very, very cool. So the C400 has a couple extra things just to mention. It has the one CF Express B card. It had the other cool thing about it has the USB-C connection for the monitor, and I don't know if that will be backwards compatible with something like the C80 because that does have a USB-C connector on it. But I'm starting to see that technology being really cool. We're seeing it with the KX. We're seeing it with the Pixis. I'm hoping we see more, third-party accessories and maybe even first-party accessories be usable for that. So it also, if you need Genlock, if you need to have that on your camera, you're going to need the C400. But they both have mini XLR ports built in, and the preamps are usually great in Canon cameras. So really, really robust cameras. I think this leads me to wanting to discuss, like, who are these cameras for and who are these cameras not for, Brandon?
I have a hard time being the person to state this because I'm not in the world of somebody that would use a C400, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not on sets. I'm not into huge production. But something tells me, especially with something like Genlock, like, if you're the person that needs a C400, right?
Yep.
That's probably a small group. Whereas if you're probably on the higher end of content creator, especially like run and gun, and you want something really small and compact, and you're not worried about putting it on like an auto crane arm or, on like a huge set, yeah, the C80 is probably your go-to if it's not a C70.
Okay, yeah, I mean, not that you're not on those sets, but you have been before. You understand what that world looks like and who might want to use these cameras.
I'm going to assume the reason you're picking up the C400, is it 6K 60? I don't know. Maybe it is, but something tells me it's probably power and I/O. And those are like usually the bigger reasons you're on a set with that kind of workflow. It's not, I mean, people were like, yeah, they use the FX3 to film, Creator or whatever. And it's like the reason they're not on set generally is because they don't have all of the power and IO that a typical set workflow requires. It's not because the image quality isn't good enough. It's because it doesn't have all the things to make it work. So
which is why they make like an FX6, for example, instead of the FX3.
Exactly. So there you go. That's what I would say. Like I'm the kind of person that gets really excited about a C80 and not so excited about a C400.
Although if someone handed me a C400, I wouldn't complain. But I
wouldn't complain.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of like a ton of power and a ton of image quality and lots of great I/O in a very small, compact body, because that's the kind of stuff I'm filming right now.
Yeah, like you're saying, like if you need Genlock, also it has like that lens control plug in the front for like whatever that's used
for the power zooms.
Power zooms, and maybe there's some lenses that give metadata and stuff. Maybe that's what that's used for. But that's not most of us. Most of us, I think, would rather have, especially for the price, a C80, because what drew me, and I think to you as well, like you were just saying, to the C70 was like it's all ready to go. Like literally, the battery life is good. You put a card in it, and it's got audio. It's got NDs. It's fairly compact. It is a kind of a weird shape. It's not as easy to rig out as something like a C400. But for, let's say you're doing light commercial work, like corporate work, content creation. I'm not talking about vlogging, but more heavy content creation stuff. Like I think it's a fantastic camera.
Yeah, I don't. The people that are buying C400s aren't the ones complaining about the limitations to the C80. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
okay. So with this world of full-frame Canon cinema cameras, because it seems like that's where Canon's going, what are some of the things that people should probably be aware of if you're thinking about this system? What about lensing, Brandon?
So for me, we talked about this earlier. Me and Josh always do a little banter back and forth of like getting our thoughts together. And truthfully, the only people I would recommend Canon to right now are current Canon users. Like I have a really hard time, and not because their cameras aren't great. It used to be like Canon had a robust lens system in EF, and then when they started moving to RF, they didn't have like professional bodies for the lenses. Now they have like lots of pro bodies that are freaking amazing. But with this third-party axe to their lensing system, now they have a lensing issue. And so for me, I have a really hard time recommending Canon to somebody coming from Panasonic or Nikon or, God forbid, Sony, because those lenses, that lens ecosystem is so much more robust. So if you've got a ton of Canon glass, cool, Canon, keep with it. Like, because they make amazing lenses. The problem is they're big, they're expensive, and there's just very few right now. So I would say lensing is probably the limiting factor. If you're looking at the C80 or the C400, like that's your limiting factor are the lenses right now. I would look at that rather than like what's Canon's like camera body ecosystem going to be like in another 2 or 3 years.
All right,
Did any of that make sense, Josh?
Yeah, no, I kind of want to argue that point a little bit because I think Canon's lineup is a little bit further along than I think people give them credit for. I think their zooms are incredible. They have a whole, and that new 24 to 105 2.8, although it's big and it's expensive, that on a C400 could be like you just bolt that thing on there and you can do anything with it. Now, what's missing are those primes that people are asking for, and they came out with the 3514, the hybrid, whatever it's called, lens. I want to see the whole series. I want to see a 24-1.4, a 50-1.4, an 85-1. I want to see that whole lineup for video. But Brandon, I'm wondering if like a lot of the C400 users, are they going to be using cinema lenses or stuff like that's going to get adapted anyways? A lot of people, if you're in the Canon world, probably still a lot of EF glass as well. Yeah.
So that's the great thing. Like if you have a ton of EF glass, you're still set up, so you're good to go. Let me jump back just a little bit. My comment with lensing being the limitation isn't necessarily primes and zooms are being covered. They have a really low end, a really, really easy price point, and then they have high level, and there's nothing in between. That's where most of us sit, is like we're trying to find like a lot of value for that middle ground price wise. So I would agree that Canon's coming out with really unique lenses. They've definitely got your zooms covered. They've got all sorts of weird zooms, but they're missing primes, and they're missing that price point that's like the $600 to like the $1,200 from a bunch of, and that's where other companies are excelling.
Sigma.
Because Tamron and Sigma and, you know, TT Artisans, like a bunch of these companies are coming out with lenses that fit that price gap, and they let the native you know, like Sony and Panasonic, like their S Pro line, they have their own like flagship that necessitates that price points, just like Canon's L. So that's where I would say the limitation is.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's still a mix and match going on here. Like, I think there's a lot of people that if they want autofocus in the Canon cinema world, they're probably buying Sigma EF glass. I think a lot of people are going that route because you can get a fairly consistent like set, right? But if you go in the Canon world, in the EF world, like the 24, 35, 50, 85, those all came out like 10 years apart from each other. And so those don't really match each other. But the same thing can be said for Sony. Like, if you look at their G Masters, they came out at all different times too. They're starting to update them, but those don't all match either. Yeah,
it's not saying don't invest with Canon because it's never going to get better. It's obviously going to get better. They continue to push out new lenses. Is it slow? Yeah, it's probably slower than all of us want to see. And they are they're going for more of these weird, unique zooms rather than like some of the staples. But it will absolutely get better. I think the other question you asked me is like what lenses are being used on the C400s?
Yeah.
I originally, you know, most cinema cameras usually stick with cinema lenses, but I mean, we've got like a really, really good dual pixel autofocus, right? In the C400. Why wouldn't you use one of these fantastic zooms or one of Canon's primes if you know you've got ridiculously good autofocus? So I don't know if cinema lenses are like, you know, a staple anymore.
I think it depends on the kind of content you're creating, right? If you have a whole team and you're pulling focus, you're doing narrative work, of course, like manual focus is going to be a lot more accurate and it's going to be more organic and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I think it might change over time, like how much autofocus is being used because the cameras are becoming better at it and there's better lensing. But yeah, there's still a lot of improvement. I mean, Canon's only been making RF stuff since what, 2018?
Yeah, it's in the broad scheme of things, it's not a long time. And to the cinema lens, to the cinema lens point, I'm sure you saw this. Like Sigma just announced their like cinema version with autofocus of their like, what is that? What's the lens that they just 45? Came out? That one. And then Blazar just announced autofocus anamorphics. So I think we're going to see more autofocus stuff in the future. You know?
Cool. All right. So what about who these cameras are not for? Because I feel like that's kind of a harder decision, but I think the biggest thing is price, right? If you can definitely get away with much cheaper cameras for most situations. I'm thinking if you want to be in the Canon world, you could get a R5C or a C70 or even an R5 Mark II or an R6 Mark II or something like that.
An R5, all those cameras are great. Like, who they're not for is a much tougher decision, and it usually just comes down to like price at this point. And if price is something you got to worry about, like jumping into a new system, if you're coming from another system and you're like, crap, now I have to like get a bunch of lenses for it. Like I said, you either have really cheap options that aren't that good, or you have really expensive options that are incredible.
Okay. My next thought about
great podcast, Josh. Well, see you later.
See you later. We could go on and on about lensing, so I wanted to move it along a little bit. But my next thought about the C80 C400 is if they are taking like a page of Sony's playbook with recycling, like this is just a hope of mine, but maybe they'll use that sensor in a really small camera and we'll finally get the Canon FX3. That's what I'm hoping happens.
That would be awesome. And for the first time since I started doing this, this is probably this is the first time I've really seen Canon where they're doing things we didn't expect. And who knows? Maybe they will. Maybe they'll make a small, boxy, really tiny FX3 competitor and slap this sensor in it. And I would totally be down for that.
And it would have the 12,800, like triple base ISO.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, just take the internal NDs off, because Lord knows Canon's not going to go that far. Put like obviously a full-size HDMI. I think we can safely say we've turned that corner forever. And I think we could see something really dope. Yeah, C-Log 2.
Fan. Definitely a little fan in there.
CF Express Type B, please.
Imagine if the Canon FX3 had the CF Express B, but the C80 doesn't. That would be hilarious. That would be like... Anyways. So, it's interesting to see where this lineup goes. I don't think we're going to see a camera above the C400 with that sensor, but I do like to see them have cameras that have the same sensor, because it does bring down the cost for us as consumers, because there's less R&D. It also allows those cameras to match better. So if you have C400 A cam, C80 B cam, you can mix and match, and they should look very, very similar. The next thing I want to sort of circle back on is the C70, because one of the coolest things, if not the coolest thing about the C70, is the sensor, and it's very special because it's the DGO, or dual gain output sensor, which we mentioned earlier on in the podcast. I think a lot of us were like, just give me a full frame C70, but what we meant by that was give us a full frame DGO sensor. Yeah. I'm really curious if we do get one of those eventually, first of all, if that happens, and B, if it'll actually be affordable. Or...
Okay, go
do
on.
they stick to just Super 35 for the DGO sensors? So there's a lot of things at play here. I'm not sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about that. I don't know why they would just keep it to the Super 35s. Something tells me if they've got one more camera to release, if the rumors are true and the roadmap says 5 cameras, something tells me they need a C500 replacement. Maybe it's the C600. The C700 didn't do that well anyway. I don't need a lot of arguments. I'm just saying sales-wise, it wasn't a prolific camera. But maybe that's what they throw the full-frame DGO in. Is this C500 replacement? Just so they can, what did you call it, Josh? Product line delineation?
Cripples. That's all right. You call it cripples.
Yeah. Just, they need that, what's their high end, and I'm assuming that's going to be it. And if they throw a full frame DGO in there, that would be freaking rad, like an extra stop or two of dynamic range.
Yeah, I would definitely like to see, I think that could be happening, potentially C500, C600, C whatever. But I would be really curious about just a C70 Mark II, if it's Super 35 or not, just something more affordable. It would be cool to see them come up with some crazy flagship camera, but for everybody else, who wants a new camera with a DGO sensor, because who else has DGO sensors? I know Ari does. Is that it? Are there other camera companies that have DGOs?
I'm pretty sure the Ursa, the 4.6 G2 had a dual gain, but correct me if I'm wrong. But
I think there is a Black Magic, but I can't remember.
It is not common.
Not common. Yeah. And very cool. Okay.
Yes.
So I feel like the more I think about these new cameras, obviously I haven't had my hands on them yet, and I have only seen a few reviews because Canon doesn't send them out to a lot of people ahead of time.
Yeah.
A lot of these cameras from Canon and from other companies too, we could start talking about that. They have these 6K, 8K sensors that are oversampled to 4K. Most of us are capturing in 4K unless you're recording RAW. I think they have this crispy, detailed, modern look to them, right? They're kind of all, in my opinion, the R5 II, the R5C, because I have both of those cameras, they kind of have a similar look to them. Of course, there's going to be difference with dynamic range, log curves, highlight roll-off, shadow detail. All that's going to vary a little bit. But overall, I feel like a lot of them have this really crispy, really detailed, clean look, which is great for a lot of things, because then you can funk it up with lenses, filtration, editing, lighting, whatever. Are we eventually going to be looking for cameras that have more character to them? Because I feel like that happens with lenses, right? We get to this point where all these lenses are clinical. Are we going to be still wanting to use cameras like the C70 or the Komodo or some of the Black Magic cameras? Is there going to be a segment of users that are just hey, I don't want a super clean image. I want something to have a little bit of character to it.
Yeah, I would say that is probably happening already right now.
Okay.
I mean, you're not wrong. I totally agree. I think given the fact that like 90% of our sensors are coming from the same company and they're all 6K oversampled or 8K oversampled, they all tend to kind of look the same. Like the texture, the overall look kind of looks the same. But there are cameras out there that have like a different look. You mentioned the C70. That definitely was a little on the softer side, but it had a look. Blackmagic 6K, that had like a look to it. Komodo has like a thickness to the image that I haven't seen in another camera. Like it's got its own look. And yeah, I think we're going to hit kind of that peak camera where everybody does kind of look just amazing. I'm not saying these like cameras look bad. I'm saying they're all going to look kind of the same. They're all going to be amazing. And right now we have lenses, but it is I think if a camera company can come out with a sensor that has its own look and like its own vibe, like they're going to probably pull people in. It's unique, and they're like, oh, you can't really get that look out of any other camera sensor because this sensor is like specially made, whether that's, I think like Sigma is making like that Foveon sensor or something. I definitely see it, some users gravitating to that. Like I'm that way. Like I want something like really unique. I don't necessarily want something that's just kind of like everybody else is using.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point that like almost every sensor is made by the same company, made by Sony. So you think, for example, in the last 4, 5, 6 years, how many cameras have the Sony A7 III sensor, right?
I don't know the number, but there's many. Yeah.
Yeah, right, from all different brands. And of course, they have their own color science and computation and stuff that makes it look a little bit different. But I think that's where Canon can be their own thing because they do make their own sensors, which because they're not producing it for everyone else, they don't have the same volume and R&D where they're a little bit slower to produce stuff and they're going to be a little bit behind in terms of that technology. But yeah, I do think that there's going to be a lot of people that are be hunting after certain things. And I think, for example, the C70 has that softer, more filmic look. I think some of that stuff's going to be desirable moving forwards, and I think it would be cool if that's why I really hope they do make another version of that camera.
Gotcha.
Okay. What about the competition?
Well, you asked this question. Do you think like the Super 35 is going to continue to exist within Canon, or is that something they're going to do away with?
I originally thought they would to do away with it because all the lenses they've ever put out for RF that are decent, they're all full frame. They have a few like really budget Super 30 APS-C lenses, right? They make for their R7 and R10s and stuff like that. But in terms of like high quality glass, they're making full frame lenses. And I think that the market mostly wants full frame cameras right now. I think we're in a period where the technology and cost of these larger format sensors are possible for people. You can get a full frame cinema camera now and afford it for the most part. Versus, a while ago, that wasn't necessarily an option. And I think also a lot of what people are seeing and creating, a lot of people are using full frame or large format sensors right now. So I think they know that those sell. Now, do they continue to make Super 35 sensors? I don't know. But I could see potentially if they do, maybe they just improve the C70 sensor. And maybe that's like a different line that they use for cinema applications. I'm not sure, man.
I think the move, this is my thought, I think the Raptor nailed it. Because it's like, we're going to give you a big sensor, but we're also going to give you a ton of resolution, and then we're going to give you a great like S35 format. So if you want to shoot in it, like it looks great. That just seems a whole lot easier than making a smaller sensor. I know it's cheaper, but it's like features and... like, hey, if I bought this full frame C80 and they're like, oh, we've also got a great like oversampled Super 35, I'm like, cool, and I can use pre-existing Super 35 glass in it if I want. That just makes more sense to me than it does creating a smaller sensor and now I have to buy specific lenses for that sensor.
I hear you.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of these new cameras are doing that because with a 6K sensor, you usually do get a 4K Super 35 mode. You don't get that oversample, but at least if you want to use, like you said, specific lenses that are, maybe they're so cool anamorphic lenses or old cinema glass or whatever that you want to use that doesn't cover a full frame sensor, you do have the option to do that. So that's a good point. But maybe making the DGO sensor full frame is really hard to do. I don't know the technology behind it.
No clue. Yeah.
Okay. What about competition? So to me right now, I think we're all kind of waiting for the sleeping giant to make his move. We're waiting for Sony to do something.
I thought you were going to say Pentax. Sony, huh?
They're just sleeping. They're not sleeping giant. They're just sleeping. Sony hasn't done anything serious in a while in terms of cameras. They came out with the A9 III at the end of last year, and I think we're waiting to see that next round of FX cameras, A7S cameras. Yeah. I don't know when that's coming, and I'm hoping that it's soon because I just really am curious what's going to happen. But the C80, C400, R5 II, R1, this is a lot. And I feel like Canons are like caught up, and it's kind of like, here's what we got going on right now. What do you think about some of the other competition? I know you've talked about the S1H2 being something that you're looking forward to.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many cameras that have just come out recently. And my thought is, there's so many awesome cameras. They're so good that they're worth a system switch. Like Nikon released a camera that's worthy of a system switch. Sony's got cameras that would make you want to switch systems. Canon finally came out with some cameras that make you want to switch systems. And there's going to be more. I mean, we haven't even hit October yet. Like, there's going to be more cameras, an S1H Mark II down the road, you know, maybe even their box version of like the S1H Mark II. Sony's going to drop something. My only thought is like everybody's getting so amped up about like what's happening right now. Like maybe, just maybe we should like pump the brake just a little bit. I get an idea, like maybe wait for like 6 months and just see, and then go, oh, okay, like now we know like the, what do you remember that thing in WWF when it used to be called WWF? I think it was the Royal Rumble, where like two guys would go in and they would start fighting, and then like a buzzer would sound and another guy would come in and they would start fighting, and then pretty soon there were 30 dudes in the rings like fighting. Like we're waiting for that. Like we got like 6 guys in the ring right now. There's gonna be a whole bunch more. You just gotta like wait and let the air clear before you start like planning out the rest of your life for a camera.
I think that's great advice. If you can imagine the WWF analogy. It's interesting because I know a lot of people who've been doing photo video for a while now. A lot of them used to shoot on Canon. Like at some point in their career, they were using Canon. Not everybody, but a lot of people. And a lot of people in the last several years have migrated to other companies, and specifically mostly to Sony for video. I think a lot of people are probably taking a look back at Canon now and being like, because they used to like shooting on Canon, but they weren't getting what they were looking for. Do you think that people are going to switch back to Canon with these cameras, or people are just so invested at this point?
I mean, I'll be honest, like I've thought about it. Like I've thought about it, so I'm sure other people have thought about it. I can't be the only person on planet Earth that's used a Canon camera that's like, maybe I'd go back. But again, it's like lenses kind of stop me. I mean, I love using Canon cameras. They're super simple. I don't see why not. However, it's more or less the lack of new cameras from other companies, and only the fact that Canon is the one producing companies where I'm like, that Canon's making moves. Because you know, as soon as like Sony drops their FX3 Mark II, it's going to be like, ah, shit, you know? Like it's just going to be like wrenching everybody's gears. That's what I mean. Like Canon's done a lot, but just like the R5 Mark II and the R1, they didn't like leapfrog everybody so far. These cameras are awesome. I'm not bagging on them at all. But just today I was thinking about, like I had to shoot something out in my garage with my S5 Mark II. And I was like, this is awesome. But the autofocus was like, I'm like, dude, any other brand for the most part, with the exception of Fuji, that would be on my eye. Like it would be on my eye. It would be locked on. And I went, if I had an FX3 right now, I would literally just sit down, hit play, sit down. I could do my whole thing and I wouldn't have to worry at all because the autofocus is so good. You know, like I think Sony is really the company that's innovating hard, and Nikon, I think Nikon's going to innovate really hard. Canon, even though this is the least cripply they've ever been, I don't see it as huge innovation. The triple, somebody's going to get mad at me, like the triple base ISO is pretty dope. Good job, Canon. But I don't know if they've introduced something that's like, wow, that headlining feature to where I'd be like, okay, I'm going to stick with Canon for the next 10 years. This is really like a short explanation gone horribly wrong, if that makes sense. Like I would much more, if I was thinking about my future, I would look much more strongly at Nikon and Sony. That's where I would put my money. Even though I'm currently with Lumix and the L mount, it's mostly for Leica and photo. It's not necessarily for video. I'm getting very basic functions out of that S5 Mark II, but if Sony or Nikon came out with something like really, I would leave it and go there.
So I want to put
was
this
a lot.
in perspective.
Sorry, Josh.
No, it's great. No, I think it gave me a lot to think about too. And I think one part is, to put it in perspective, we're nerds with this stuff, right?
We're super
and I,
nerdy.
And everyone else watching this, we're all camera nerds. The reality is, all the cameras that we have now are absolutely amazing.
So good.
And so when we're talking about this stuff, like Brandon's complaining about autofocus, he would get better autofocus with another brand. Yes, we understand that. But when we're looking ahead to what's coming up, like, I don't know how big these leaps are going to be in the near future. I think there are periods of technology where we get big advances. I don't know if we're ready for the next one yet. We'll see like what Sony and Nikon come out with. And I think Nikon is a few years out. I don't think that's going to be this year or next year. I think it's going to take them a while to like incorporate all the red technology and all the things they're working on. So what I've come to sort of want to talk about to try to wrap this up, Brandon, is like, you know, like, are we going to order one of these cameras? Like, I already bought the R5 II, but I'm taking a hard look at the C80.
Makes sense.
Like, I think you've pretty much said already, you're not about to jump back into Canon. Is that the case?
I like the investment would be too big. I would have to sell too much, lose too much money, and then reinvest it in a company that I really don't think is innovating that much. And earlier I mentioned innovation, and you're talking about innovation. We're thinking like, where's the next big leap come from? It's got to be outside of the box. We know we're not going to see any huge innovations out of image quality. Like we're getting to the apex where it's really hard, or you're going to have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to do it. But when I look at a company like Lumix or Sony, they're making things that just make our lives easier. Like, we're going to make built-in wireless receivers. We're going to make built-in, media, really fast 1 terabyte SSDs that make our lives easier. That's where I see innovation. I don't see Canon doing any of that. So while they might make a fantastic camera and great lenses, some of the things that these other companies will come out that just make our jobs easier, I don't see Canon doing that. They're not going to keep up. They're going to be 2 or 3 years behind everybody else when they do it, eventually do it.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I think we've talked about this before too, where I don't think we're going to see huge differences in image quality in the next few years in terms of dynamic range. Sure, rolling shutter will get a little bit better. Sure, we'll have a little bit more information in the highlights and shadows. We might get a little higher resolution or better codecs, better like overheating performance, like stuff like that, small upgrades. Yeah. What's going to be more important, I think, as these cameras start to all look more alike in a lot of ways, is user experience. I know we've talked about this heavily on this podcast, and I'm trying to think about that more as I review and use cameras too, because like you said, wireless connectivity for audio. I'm thinking phone control apps, like that stuff.
Nobody can make a goddamn app. Like, why are we still worried about what sensors in a camera when they can't even let us port an image over to our phone to see if it's in focus or not? Like, it's bullshit. Like,
yeah. So
Red.
What I've come to realize about myself, about the C80, was I have dreamt about a full-frame C70 for years. Because I've had the C70, love it, but I also own a lot of full-frame Canon RF glass, and I'm like, man, if we had a full-frame C70, and then it comes out, and I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know if I want to buy this, because I don't have the work to need that camera right now, right? I have a little bit of client work, but I'm not doing my documentary stuff I used to do when I had the farming channel. The image is going to be, yes, better than my R5C, but like, is it going to be that much better than my R5C when I'm in controlled lighting situations? Like, it's an expensive camra, That's for me, it's a hard thing to swallow.
But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make sense. Like, I've been thinking, both of us always go through this period of where we acquire more gear and then we sell it off and we like try to minimize. And like today I was watching a video on, I think it was a Blackmagic camera or something. And I was like, man, that's got so much stuff. That would be great. Like, I went on to MPB to see how much it was. It was like $3,000. And then I'm like, why don't I spend $2,000 more and get a C80? Like, it's full frame. It does this and this and this. Like, and then I went, oh yeah, but I got to like buy other things. And then it was like, you have a Komodo X that does everything you could possibly want it to do. And its only job right now is it's stuck on a impact pole filming A-rolls for podcasts and YouTube videos. Like, I'm not even, like, I could swap this out and put something else in its place, but that's what I mean. Like, I don't need anything different. I could get away with a whole lot less. I don't even know why I'm looking at other cameras right now.
Because we love it. Because we love the stuff.
Yeah, that's it. It's just
I mean,
love the
for
gear.
me in
I'm
the
a huge
studio,
nerd.
I'm constantly rotating cameras, and I've rotated some
Yeah.
very expensive cameras through my A-roll setup. I was using an OG Komodo. I've used tons of other cameras. I'm now using the 6K full frame, which I got for basically $1,400 because I bought it when it was on sale and then sold the license. So for me, I'm like, what do I need to do this, right? Now, for the work that I'm doing currently, I don't need a lot of camera. Like, I can get by with not a lot of camera. I have a lot of good lenses already. Now, the other thing I struggle with, Brandon, is I also run a YouTube channel where I always have the newest camera and I'm always reviewing the newest thing. And B&H does let me borrow a lot, and I'm very grateful for that. But I also feel like sometimes I should always have the newest camera because then I'm part of the conversation. So that's kind of a struggle for me when I look at like the C80. It's like, do I need a C80? No, I don't need a C80. I can use my R5C or whatever.
Josh.
I am an outlier. So that's where I sort of struggle with it. So at the time being, I have not put in a pre-order yet, but we'll see if that changes.
So it's, after all that, you're not going to tell us whether or not you're going to do it.
I haven't. I'm as of right now, no, because I have not put in a pre-order for it.
All right.
So, all right. So, anyways, that's the deal with the C80. I think it'll be really interesting once it starts shipping. It's supposed to ship end of November, from what I'm seeing. I can't wait to see when it gets in.
Okay.
It's only like 2 months.
Oh yeah, that's okay. Whatever.
So it'll be really interesting when it ships. I think it's going to be a really strong camera. I think a lot of people who are doing corporate work, documentaries, commercial work, I think it's like if I was doing corporate interviews every day with B-roll, like I would probably grab two C80s and just crush it with that. Like it would be a very small kit, and I get a lot of work done. So
for sure.
Anything else you want to add to the conversation?
No, I think I made plenty of unreasonable comments, and there was a lot of babbling, and you can let me know down in the comments.
Okay, sounds like a standard podcast for us.
Yeah.
All right, thanks everyone for watching. Really appreciate you guys, and we'll see you in the next one.
Peace.